Professor Amitav, thank you for joining me in ตอบโจทย์ AMM meeting finally they have reached 6 common point. Do you think this will fix the damage after the AMM meeting?
I think it will to some extent. It actually highlights what is obviously already a fact that ASEAN countries actually agreed on the key points. But some damage has been done. The perception that for the first time in its history, ASEAN did not issue a joint communique. In the perceptions of international media, this is going to be difficult to unravel. And also, I don't know whether you have seen the statement, the press release that Cambodia issued with the 6 points. It was quite adamant, quite defensive. It basically was a very angry press statement. It blamed 2 ASEAN members for blocking the communique for the first time in ASEAN's history. It said that the communique makes no difference, no change from Cambodia's position, that the bilateral disputes with Vietnam and Philippines are not mentioned. So it was a pretty angry, no ground given kind of a press release that accompanied the 6-point consensus statement.
Is Cambodia being too much of a bad boy within ASEAN?
Well, I think the Cambodians can explain that best, but I think they have created some sort of a perception that they have put ASEAN's interest, collective interest aside for their own position, which must be based on their own national interest. And I think it is going to raise some questions about Cambodia's foreign policy, Cambodia's role in ASEAN. And hopefully Cambodia can dispel that. I think it's absolutely vital that ASEAN comes up, issues that communique, even if it's delayed. And Cambodia does that before the next ASEAN summit.
Yes.
And Cambodia must do its best to achieve a consensus because it is the chair, it has responsibilities. So if it doesn't do that, or for some reason it still insists on just status quo, what has been there before, I think it's going to create perceptions, raise questions about how committed Cambodia is to ASEAN.
Behind the scene, what ASEAN members should be doing from now on until November before the next ASEAN summit, East Asia summit, regarding the issue of South China Sea?
Yes, I think that's a very good question. They should be doing their level best to come up with a very clear, united position on South China Sea, focusing on the need for a code of conduct. I think the important thing, and the Cambodians to one extent may be right, that I think the bilateral disputes are less important than the need for a joint sort of statement or the need for a declaration itself, declaration on the code of conduct or a binding code of conduct itself. If they can make sufficient progress on the code of conduct for November, that will really undo all the damage.
As far as you can see, are you confident that they can make it?
There is a chance, but it's not great because I think we need to resolve some of the issues, and there is some tension has been created already. But on the other hand, there is a possibility. The question is not whether it is ASEAN countries or their differences, but it's China. Whether the Chinese are going to come on board on a declaration, a formal binding declaration by the summit, because the Chinese seem to stick to their position that the time is not ripe yet.
But the damage has happened, and it seems that ASEAN countries are being divided into at least 2 camps. What do you see the situation will proceed from now on?
Well, I would put it differently. I think Cambodia is really the odd man out on this. Even Singapore and Malaysia would have gone along with the ASEAN communique and the common position, would not made the South China Sea hold back on the communique being issued. So Cambodia has felt very strongly that it cannot go along with the communique. So it's not a division within ASEAN that you have 5 countries on one side and 5 countries on the other side. And Cambodia is one of the members of ASEAN, but still one member. So in that sense, to the extent that the original core members of ASEAN are online with, they have a common position, that actually to me matters, impact more in some ways. And I hope that Cambodia will realize that for the sake of an ASEAN consensus, it may have to sacrifice or compromise on its own national position, no matter how strongly it may believe in it.
What should be the role of United States regarding South China Sea?
Vietnam and the Philippines are doing what is in their interest. They are party to the dispute and they feel pressured by China, and they can take whatever help they can get. The United States is not directly supporting them. As you know, the United States does not recognize the claims of parties on the South China Sea. It simply has a position that this conflict should not jeopardize freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. And now that's to me a quite reasonable position, and if that seems to support the positions of Vietnam and Philippines, that's a coincidence. It's not like there is a sort of a alliance between. I mean, the Philippines and US do have an alliance, but that's very different from America saying it wants freedom of navigation. So the United States is concerned about freedom of navigation. It's also concerned about boosting its military presence in the region. It's rebalancing, it's deploying forces, paying more attention to this region, partly because of the rise of China, partly because China's rise as a military power, and also US has very strong vital interest in this region.
You said ASEAN countries should have unity regarding the issue of South China Sea, especially before the November ASEAN summit. But the issue should be considered bilateral issue in which each country should deal with China separately.
That's a good question. My position is that it's both bilateral and multilateral. The actual territorial settlement probably has to be negotiated bilaterally. So what then the claims and the territorial claims between, say, Philippines and China, Vietnam and China, there has to be the modality of that ultimately has to be bilateral, the framework. But this is also a regional issue because it affects regional peace and stability. It affects freedom of navigation. It affects the prosperity of the whole region. And ASEAN has a role as a mandate to improve the outlook for security and prosperity of the region. And as a multilateral institution, and ASEAN, through ASEAN itself, ASEAN Regional Forum, East Asia Summit, these institutions are supposed to help preserve stability and economic well-being. So therefore, they cannot simply look the other way when conflict looms over this issue, whether it is bilateral or multilateral. But also, it is a kind of a the South China Sea issue. There are so many bilateral disputes involved, and the fact that China claims a very large chunk, almost all of South China Sea, doesn't make it really bilateral. It intrudes into the territorial claims of so many different countries that it will be a mistake to see this as a purely bilateral issue.
ASEAN is 45 years this year. Do you see it as a man who is having midlife crisis?
I think that's partly true, but this crisis has been induced by an expansion of membership, for good reason. I mean, Vietnam, Cambodia, and all these Laos, Myanmar are members of ASEAN. This is good for ASEAN, but expansion of membership creates new burdens. So the Vietnamese dispute with China over the South China Sea is a result of that expansion, because now Vietnam's problem becomes ASEAN's problem. Vietnam's problem with China. Similarly, ASEAN has to satisfy the expectations of all these 10 countries. This is a much larger group. 10 countries, with 10 countries, it's much more difficult to reach a consensus than when you are 5 countries or 6 countries. So it's a midlife crisis, but it's a midlife crisis where you have the family has also grown, and the burdens have become burdens have increased, but ASEAN also needs to change its way, become much more agile, much more united, much more vigilant, to overcome this midlife crisis. It needs to develop a capacity, like the secretariat has to be expanded and strengthened, and there has to be more research and analysis of regional security problems. But some of these problems are going to remain with ASEAN. They need to be carefully managed.
Does the policy of non-interference still work in ASEAN?
Well, yes and no. It works to the extent that the most blatant, severe cases of one country interfering in the domestic politics of another country is not happening. I mean, what happened when Vietnam invaded Cambodia and installed a regime of its own choice in 1978-79. That's not happening. So non-interference works. So having Vietnam and Cambodia as members of ASEAN means they also accept this principle. But it doesn't work when it comes to addressing some of the new global challenges, transnational challenges like climate change, forest fires, haze problem. And also when it comes to human rights and democracy, ASEAN cannot be seen as not respecting human rights. But commenting on human rights in another country means interference. So should ASEAN then not do it? That is no longer acceptable. ASEAN has to promote human rights because it has created a human rights mechanism or two of its own. So that way non-interference no longer works.
Does it mean it will be no longer work in Rakhine State regarding the violence against Rohingya in Myanmar?
Well, I think that is, domestic violence of that type does happen throughout Asia in other ASEAN countries. Much depends on how the government of Myanmar handles it. So it has to exercise restraint, it has to allow some kind of international observation, and ASEAN should express, if not public, but at least private concern to Myanmar. This is a very bad time for Myanmar to be seen in a negative light, because so much good is happening to Myanmar, its international image. It's on the verge of restoring its international image and be respected as a member of the regional community, ASEAN or international community. So he has to handle the Rohingya problem very carefully with an eye to its in regional and international credibility and image.
Should ASEAN put more pressure on Myanmar government regarding the Rohingya issue?
Well, depends on what you mean by pressure. I mean, again, this has been a perennial issue between ASEAN and Myanmar, and so not doing anything, not saying anything is no good, but also trying to be very open and aggressive about it is also going to backfire. And it's also going to derail the process for change in Myanmar. If you put too much pressure, this will put the people who are pushing for change in Myanmar, like the president of Myanmar, on a bad, negative light. So it has to be very carefully calibrated. So to express concern, communicate its concern, and urge restraint, try to help Myanmar to find a way out of this so that it doesn't get into an international, negative international light, and sort of gives ammunition to those who are skeptical of the reform in Myanmar.
Overall, among 10 ASEAN countries, what's the position of Thailand as far as you can see?
Thailand has been kind of distracted by its domestic developments, and it hasn't been able to play the role as a leader that it ought to play. Thailand is the founder of ASEAN. I mean, ASEAN was founded in Bangkok, and it was a Thai initiative in many ways. So Thailand has a special responsibility to always pay attention to ASEAN and do its best for ASEAN. But domestic distractions, domestic troubles in Thailand has prevented that from happening, at least in the perception of its neighbors and in the international community. Now that Thailand seems to be, doing okay politically and economically, it should sort of take up some leadership role, especially when it comes to dealing with Myanmar, even dealing with South China Sea, because Thailand is a neutral party here. It doesn't have a claim on South China Sea. So it should share with Indonesia some of the leadership role Indonesia is playing. So it's a good time for Thailand to do more, especially to reverse the perception that for the past few years, Thailand has been too distracted to actually play any role in ASEAN.
Overall, what's the strength of ASEAN?
ASEAN's main strength is that it has prevented major conflict or war among ASEAN members since it was founded. There are minor conflicts, but no major outright war. ASEAN is very inclusive. It has all kinds of countries, political systems, religions in its membership. It's not like the European Union, which is basically a Christian grouping. ASEAN has Muslim countries and Buddhist countries and Christian countries, Confucian countries. So tolerance, inclusion is very important. Also, ASEAN has done a wonderful job in engaging all the great powers of the international system. I mean, this is a regional organization, but all the great powers send their foreign ministers and leaders to meet in ASEAN. United States, China, India, Russia, Australia, Canada. No other regional grouping can claim to have such a global role. Despite being a regional grouping, and it's an inclusive role. It's a role that engages, not divides, all the major powers of the world. And that is, to me, a big achievement for a regional organization, which is essentially a group of developing countries.
Can I say that you are being optimistic about the future of ASEAN? Do you see any destructive or any obstacle for its future?
I think ASEAN has come a long way and has done much better than it had, people had expected when it was founded in '67. I think ASEAN is indispensable for the security of at least Southeast Asia, and there is no substitute for ASEAN. I don't think China, Japan, United States, or India can step into the vacuum of providing leadership of a regional structure or architecture if ASEAN is to move away or be sidelined. So ASEAN is played an important role, but ASEAN does face challenges. I'm not being optimistic while being blind to ASEAN's shortcomings. I think ASEAN needs to reform itself. It needs to strengthen its secretariat, have more capacity, give it more authority to carry out the tasks that the ASEAN Community Building Project assigns the Secretariat to do. ASEAN must maintain unity at all costs when it deals with China and all the great powers, which is something that we are concerned about today in relation to China. ASEAN needs to bridge the gap between the ASEAN haves and ASEAN have-nots, the CLMV, Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam on the one hand, and the other more developed ASEAN countries on the other. And ASEAN also needs to have a more solid, more focused commitment to human rights and democracy. It should empower the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, give it more teeth.
Any disruption on ASEAN community in 2015?
Well, there will be some. I think expectations have been too high. I don't see the ASEAN economic community being realized completely. The ASEAN security community is probably going to be achieved to a large extent, but not all the expectations and mechanisms will be realized. I think the issue here is you have a community, you have a blueprint, you have plans, but these are words, these are letters. Whether ASEAN's actions can live up to those plans. For example, it's good to have a security community blueprint, but that requires a mechanism for resolving conflicts among ASEAN members. So a lot depends on how the Thai-Cambodia dispute go, how some of the South China Sea issues go. The community idea also talks about human rights and democracy, particularly the socio-cultural community. That means ASEAN countries must respect human rights and give more power to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, must recognize the role of the civil society, which is part of the socio-cultural community. So ASEAN will be judged on the basis of its action rather than the blueprints and the words that have been in place. So in that sense, by 2015, I think there will be some progress, but I don't see all the commitments ASEAN has made will be in place, realized by then.